Hello and welcome to another episode of Reason at Large. I'm Craig Biddle. Today I want to discuss a question that was submitted by Jason, and that question is, you've written and spoken at length about why capitalism is the only moral social system, and I find your arguments very convincing. But in daily conversation with people, I don't have an hour to make the full case. What's your 5-minute version? This is an excellent question, and not necessarily an easy one to field. So let me begin by saying the most you can do in 5 minutes is give an indication of why capitalism is moral. You can't make anything near a full case in that time, and you shouldn't even try. You should just try to, if somebody's interested in these ideas, you should try to give him the essentials and then point him in the direction of some other reading or other materials. But frequently we do have only 5 minutes over a coffee or something with someone, and you want to make the case. So what should you include in your case? And it to some extent depends on the person you're talking to and the context of knowledge that person has, and what they know and what they don't. So I'm going to have to set that aside and just sort of assume a general level of common sense knowledge on the part of the person you're speaking with. I think there are essentially three things that you need to convey to indicate to someone the morality of capitalism, or why capitalism is the only moral social system. And those are what exactly capitalism is, what is the nature of this thing, what the alternatives are, if not capitalism, then what, and then lastly, what does it mean for something to be moral, specifically for a social system to be moral. So we'll take these in turn, and I'll just try to give an indication at each turn. So capitalism is the social system of individual rights, including property rights, in which all property is privately owned. So it's the system that upholds the principle of individual rights, the idea that each individual has a right to life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of happiness. And it upholds these rights, which are essentially the rights that the founders of America upheld. It upholds these rights and protects these rights by banning physical force from social relationships. And it does this by having police, courts, and a military to ban force, both domestically and from abroad, against citizens. In the case of the United States, it would be against U.S. citizens. But it doesn't ban force only by foreign aggressors and other citizens. It also bans force, at least initiatory force, on the part of the government as well, and that's the purpose of the Constitution, is to ban the government from initiating physical force against citizens. The Constitution is precisely a limitation on the government. So a proper constitution bans the government from using initiatory force. What the government may do and should do, and under capitalism does do, is use retaliatory force only against those who initiate force. And it does that by means of the police to deal with domestic aggression, and by means of the courts to adjudicate disputes, whether they're among criminals and citizens, or whether they're among citizens that have disagreements about things, the nature of a contract or whatever. And then, of course, the military to stop foreign aggressors from using force against citizens. So under capitalism, to concretize some of this, if you own a business, say you own a bakery, that bakery is yours. You built the bakery, it belongs to you. You may do whatever you want in your bakery as long as you don't use your bakery in some way that violates other people's rights. You can't put cyanide in your biscuits and sell them, obviously. That would violate rights. But as long as you're not violating rights, or whether by force or fraud or any other form of indirect force, extortion and the like, you may do whatever you want with your bakery. And if you earn a lot of money doing this, you may spend that money however you like. You can pour it back into the business, open additional bakeries. You can put it in the bank. You can spend it on your children's private education. You can give it to charity. You can buy a yacht. It's your money. You do with it as you see fit. Private property rights. If you hire employees, you do so by means of voluntary agreement. You offer them a job at a certain rate, say an hourly rate, and they can take or leave it. If they contract with you to take that rate, then they have to perform their job, and you have to pay them the money. This is an agreement. It's a contract. So, capitalism is an anarchy. There is law, and people have to abide by the law and uphold their contracts, or they can be taken to court, where these issues can be adjudicated. But insofar as people remain peaceful and don't violate others' rights, they are fully free to act on their own judgment. And that's sort of the economic aspect of freedom under capitalism. But capitalism is not about economic freedom alone. It's about freedom in general. So, for instance, under capitalism, you have full freedom of speech. You can profess whatever you think is true. You have full freedom of expression. That doesn't mean somebody has to give you a microphone or put you on the radio or give you a column in a newspaper. But no one can stop you from saying what you think is true, as long as you don't use speech in a way that incites violence or in some way violates people's rights. You have full freedom of speech. You have full freedom to act in social engagements as you see fit, as long as you don't violate rights. So, for instance, consenting adults can have whatever kind of sex they want to have, whether it's gay sex or heterosexual sex or any other kind of sex, as long as we're talking about consenting adults, they have rights to act on their own judgment. This is the right to liberty and the right to pursuit of happiness that is protected here. So if religious bigots want to say no, homosexual sex should be prohibited, they can think that or feel that all they want, but they may not have laws passed to that effect, because that would violate rights. You are also free under capitalism to, for instance, eat whatever kind of drugs you want to eat, whether they're medicinal drugs for curing a disease or whether they're recreational drugs, as long as your use of those drugs does not in some way violate the rights of others, as long as you're not stealing the drugs, and as long as you're not using the drugs and then harming people because you're high on them. So capitalism is simply the system of freedom. It's a system of full freedom for all individuals and businesses to act on their own judgment, so long as they don't violate the rights of others. If you do violate the rights of others, if you're negligent, if your kitchen in your bakery is so filthy and you keep it that way, and it's so dirty that your customers are getting ill with food poisoning, this can be taken to court and as a case of negligence, and you can be sued. So again, it's not anarchy. Capitalism is a system of individual rights in which there is a government, and the government does one thing, and that is protect rights by banning force. So now, what are the alternative systems? If capitalism does this one thing and does it well, what are the alternative systems? Well, the alternatives are essentially communism, socialism, fascism, theocracy, democracy, and various versions of these. Communism, of course, is the system in which the government or the community, hence communism, owns all of the means of production. So they own all private. They own all property. There is no private property. They own all property. They own all the money supply. They own essentially all the labor as well, because they get to dictate who's going to go where and work for what amount, and so on. So there are no rights or rights are not recognized, I should say, under communism. Rights are violated right and left. The government comes in and says, on behalf of the community, this is what you're going to do with the product of your effort here, and this is what you're going to do with these machines, and so on. So that's one alternative. Then there's socialism, which is essentially the same thing as communism, except that it comes into existence by means of elections rather than revolution. So again, society owns the means of production, and you, the individual, will do what society dictates you'll do, both in the economic realm and in the social realm, and even in the personal private realm. If the government says you can have gay sex, then you can have gay sex. If they say you can't, then you can't. Depends on what the society determines. Fascism simply means groupism. It's the same thing, essentially, as communism or socialism, except that under fascism, the government says that you do own private property. Sure, you own that property. Sure, you own that bakery, but we're going to tell you what kind of flour you have to use. We're going to tell you how much you have to pay your employees. We're going to tell you what your hours are going to be, and so on and so forth. So it's nominal private property, but your property and your life is dictated by the group. Theocracy, of course, is ruled by church leaders, or those who claim to be representatives of God. So that's a massive violation of rights. I don't need to elaborate that. And of course, democracy, which is a term that is completely misused today, means unlimited majority rule. We have a democratic process in the United States properly, whereby you vote for your representatives. But democracy as a system of government is majority rule. So 51% decide that the other 49% should be enslaved, then that's the way it's going to be. Or any other kind of vote. So those are the alternatives. It's either capitalism, where rights are protected by the government banning the initiation of physical force from all social relationships and using force in retaliation and only in retaliation against those who initiate it. Or you have some kind of a statist system in which the government initiates force against citizens, violating their rights to life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of happiness. Those are the alternatives. Now, the last thing that you need to discuss or answer when you're talking briefly about why capitalism is moral is, what does it mean for something to be moral? What is this thing? And the only proper standard of morality is, as Ayn Rand pointed out and gave a whole elaboration on the foundation of this, the only proper standard of moral value is the requirements of human life on Earth. The only reason we need morality is so that we have long-term guidance, long-term principled guidance about how to act so that we can live. That's the ultimate goal. And so when we ask a question, well, is this thing moral? What we're asking is this thing conducive to, or is it congruent with the requirements of human life? And to answer that, we have to say, well, what are the requirements of human life? Well, obviously, we need all sorts of things. We need food, clothing, shelter, medical care, and countless other values. That's quite obvious. So how do we get these things? What do we have to do to get these things? Well, we have to look at reality and think, and then we have to act on our judgment. That's how we grow corn, by figuring out the requirements of these crops and using reason and logic to figure that out, and then enacting the ideas that we have discovered, and so on. And that's how not only we build corn, but how we develop and deliver medical care. It's how we create books. It's how we create the internet. It's how we do everything that matters for human life. So we need lots of things. We have to think and act on our rational judgment in order to get these. So the question when we get to the level of politics is, well, what can stop us from acting on our judgment? And the only thing that can stop us from acting on our judgment is physical force, is other people using physical force against us. If somebody puts a gun to your head and says, you're not going to run your bakery this way, you're going to run it that way, then you have to run your bakery that way. If somebody puts a gun to your head and says, you're going to give me your money, or I'm going to shoot you, or throw you in jail, or fine you, or any other form of force, they're forcing you to act against your judgment, against what you would do if they were not using force against you. And so when we talk about capitalism, we're talking about a system that actually legalizes the requirements of human life. This is the fundamental reason why capitalism is moral. Capitalism leaves people fully free to act on their judgment, which is their basic means of living. So it's the only system that is fully in line with the fundamental requirements of human life. Those requirements are myriad, but in a social context, they're pretty straightforward. People have to be free to act on their judgment, their means of living, and capitalism is the only system that leaves them free. So that, in a nutshell, is why capitalism is moral. I think I probably went a little longer than 5 minutes, but it's in the vicinity. And that's the end of today's episode of Reason at Large. If you have a question you'd like me to answer in a future episode, please email it to me at cbiddle@theobjectivestandard.com. And I can't guarantee I'll answer every question, but I certainly will look at all of them. And if I don't get to yours right away, perhaps I'll get to it soon or in the future. Thanks for tuning in, and have a great day.